The 100 Years' War wasn't one long battle. It was a tangled mess of invasions, dynastic claims, betrayals, and shifting power between England and France from 1337 to 1453. It started over a throne, but ended up reshaping language, politics, and the very concept of national identity in Europe. Kings were captured, peasants rebelled, and legends like Joan of Arc rose from the ashes of political failure. But here's what most people miss. The real story of the war wasn't clean or heroic. It was unpredictable, brutal, and packed with twists that textbooks often skip. These 5 facts reveal just how insane the 100 Years' War really was, and why it still echoes through European history today. Fact 1. The war didn't actually last 100 years, and it wasn't one war, despite its name. The 100 Years' War lasted 116 years, and it wasn't a single war. It was a chaotic series of battles, truces, betrayals, and political resets between 1337 and 1453. It's better understood as 3 or 4 separate wars with long gaps in between. Entire generations were born and died without seeing battle, only for their children to pick up where the bloodshed left off. That's how deep the dynastic grudge ran. England's kings, descended from French nobility, believed they had a legal claim to the French throne. France disagreed, and the continent was dragged into more than a century of war because of it. And if you think it was just armies fighting, wait until you hear about a king who got captured by kids. Fact 2. A teenager captured the King of France. At the Battle of Poitiers in 1356, the French King John II was taken prisoner, not by an army of adults, but by teenage English knights under the command of the Black Prince. King John was surrounded during the battle, and instead of surrendering to a seasoned commander, he was taken into custody by a group of 14 to 16-year-olds. They treated him with respect, even guarded him all the way back to England. But make no mistake, the King of France was now a hostage. His ransom? Over 3 million gold crowns, a number so high that France couldn't pay it, triggering economic collapse and even a civil war. This wasn't just a battlefield loss. It was a humiliation that fractured France internally for years. But internal chaos wasn't limited to France. England had its own brutal uprising, and it was sparked by the very war they were fighting. Fact 3. The war sparked one of England's bloodiest revolts. The constant taxation to fund war campaigns pushed the English peasantry to the edge, and in 1381, they exploded in rebellion. The peasants' revolt wasn't just about taxes. It was about a system that forced ordinary people to die for a king's foreign war, while their homes were crushed by poverty. Marching on London, armed with farm tools and rage, the rebels even managed to capture the Tower of London. They assassinated royal officials and forced King Richard II, who was only 14, to meet them face to face. He promised reforms, then had the rebel leaders executed once they left. The war created pressure, not just abroad, but inside England itself. And meanwhile, France was facing its own turning point, and it came in the form of a teenage girl with no military training. Fact 4. Joan of Arc flipped the war, and she wasn't even a soldier. In 1429, France was losing badly. The English held vast territory, and morale was collapsing. Then came Joan of Arc, a 17-year-old peasant girl who claimed to hear divine voices telling her to save France. In one of the most shocking turns in military history, she convinced the future King Charles VII to give her command of an army. And she won. The siege of Orleans, thought to be unwinnable, was broken under her leadership. Joan wasn't a trained commander. She was a symbol, a rallying point. Her presence reinvigorated French nationalism and turned the tide of the war. But she was captured by the English a year later, tried for heresy, and burned alive at 19 years old. Her death didn't end her influence. It supercharged it. And within 25 years, France had reclaimed nearly all its territory. But there's one last twist in this war that no one talks about. And it's about how it ended. Fact 5. England technically never gave up the French throne. You'd think that after losing the war in 1453, England would move on. But they didn't. English monarchs continued to call themselves King of France until the year 1801. That's nearly 350 years after the war ended. The claim was symbolic, a reminder of what had once been, but it shaped foreign policy, national identity, and even led to later conflicts. It became more about pride than power, but the obsession with controlling France never truly died out. In fact, it's one of the longest-standing diplomatic claims in history, born from a war that started with a throne and ended with a myth. The 100 Years' War wasn't a clean fight. It was a chaotic, generation-spanning power struggle filled with fake claims, royal hostages, peasant uprisings, and unexpected heroes. It redefined monarchy, nationalism, and warfare in medieval Europe. And it left behind legends, both real and rewritten. So next time someone mentions the 100 Years' War, remember, it wasn't just long. It was messy, brutal, and more modern than we'd like to admit. Like and subscribe for more.